Bless up, family. This is Roniel Cole, and welcome to the first episode of the Legends of Antiquity for the new year. It's 2025, and we're stepping into it with new blessings, fresh opportunities, and unstoppable vibes. Leave the old behind. This year is about growth, faith, and grabbing what's yours. Let's set the tone right, build strong, and embrace everything the Most High has planned for us. Imagine a city thriving with wealth, culture, and energy. At first glance, it seems like the perfect place to live, a hub of progress and opportunity. But beneath the surface, the city is decaying, morally and spiritually, and its people are consumed by pride, greed, and unchecked desires. Now picture divine messengers sent to the city, not to celebrate its achievements, but to deliver a chilling warning. Time has run out. Judgment is coming. This is the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. It's a tale of destruction, yes, but it's also a story of mercy, second chances, and the consequences of ignoring warnings. And while it's easy to see this as a story about ancient times, the truth is, Sodom and Gomorrah mirror many aspects of our world today. On today's episode of the Legends of Antiquity, we'll explore this ancient story and the lessons it holds for us now. What led to the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah? What warnings did the people ignore? And how does this narrative challenge the way we think about morality, justice, and redemption? Let's uncover the truths behind the fall of Sodom, Gomorrah, and the other nations and warnings we still ignore today. The fall of Sodom and Gomorrah. Our story begins in Genesis 18, where we see a pivotal conversation between God and Abraham. God reveals that the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is so great, their sins so grievous, that he's decided to investigate. This outcry isn't just about the actions of individuals. It's about systemic sin, a city where corruption, injustice, and violence have become a way of life. Imagine a place where the poor are ignored, the vulnerable are exploited, and greed dominates every aspect of society. That's the backdrop of Sodom and Gomorrah. But here's where we see something remarkable. Abraham, knowing the cities are sinful, doesn't give up on them. Instead, he pleads with God to spare them for the sake of the righteous. In Genesis 18:23-25, Abraham asks, "Will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked? What if there are 50 righteous people in the city? Will you really sweep it away and not spare the place for the sake of the 50 righteous people in it?" God agrees. But as the negotiation continues, Abraham lowers the number, asking if the cities can be spared for 40, 30, 20, and finally just 10 righteous people. God's response each time? Yes. This tells us something critical. God is merciful and patient, willing to spare even the wicked for the sake of a few righteous individuals. But the heartbreaking truth, not even 10 righteous people could be found in Sodom and Gomorrah. What were the sins that led to such destruction? Ezekiel 16:49-50 paints a vivid picture. Now this was the sin of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters were arrogant, overfed, and unconcerned. They did not help the poor and needy. They were haughty and did detestable things before me. Therefore I did away with them. These weren't just personal sins. They were systemic failures. The people of Sodom and Gomorrah were guilty of pride, gluttony, neglect of the poor, and outright rejection of God's commands. This wasn't about a single act of immorality. It was about a culture that had turned its back on everything good, true, and just. The angel's warning and Lot's escape. In Genesis 19, God sends 2 angels to Sodom, disguised as travelers. When they arrive, they're met by Lot, Abraham's nephew, who insists on offering them hospitality. Lot knows the danger they face in the city and is determined to protect them. But as night falls, the true nature of Sodom is revealed. The men of the city surround Lot's house and demand, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us so that we can have sex with them." This was not about love or companionship. It was about violence and domination. The men of Sodom wanted to humiliate and degrade the angels through an act of rape. This moment reflects the utter moral depravity of the city, where violence, exploitation, and disrespect for human dignity were commonplace. Lot, in desperation, offers his daughters instead, a horrifying decision that reflects how deeply even Lot had been shaped by the culture of Sodom. The angels intervene, striking the men with blindness and warning Lot to flee with his family. But even then, Lot hesitates. The angels physically grab Lot, his wife, and his daughters, pulling them out of the city. Their warning is clear. Flee for your lives. Don't look back, and don't stop anywhere in the plain. Flee to the mountains, or you will be swept away. Sadly, Lot's wife disobeys. She looks back, longing for what she's leaving behind, and is turned into a pillar of salt, a stark reminder of the cost of clinging to sin. Misinterpretations and the truth about Sodom's sins. The sins of Sodom and Gomorrah were complex and multifaceted, but the Bible does give us specific details. When the men of Sodom surrounded Lot's house in Genesis 19, their intent was explicit. They demanded, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us so that we can have sex with them." This wasn't a request for companionship or love. It was a demand for violence and domination. Their intent was to sexually assault the visitors, a clear act of humiliation and power. This reflects the depth of moral depravity in Sodom, where violence, exploitation, and disregard for human dignity had become the norm. Homosexuality was a part of Sodom's sins, yes, but the Bible consistently teaches that God's design for sexuality is between a man and a woman within the covenant of marriage. Leviticus 18:22, Romans 1:20, 6-26, 1 Corinthians 6:9-10. The attempted assault on the angels in Genesis 19 was a gross perversion of that design. However, it's crucial to understand that this act wasn't about consensual same-sex relationships. It was about violent sexual exploitation, which God condemns in all forms. The broader sins of Sodom. While the attempted sexual assault is a shocking part of Sodom's story, it wasn't the only reason for their destruction. Ezekiel 16:49-50 gives us a broader picture of their sins. Now this was the sin of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters were arrogant, overfed, and unconcerned. They did not help the poor and needy. They were arrogant and did detestable things before me. Therefore, I did away with them. Sodom's sins were systemic and deeply rooted. Pride, greed, neglect of the vulnerable, inhospitality, and violence all played a role. The attempted assault in Genesis 19 was one expression of their overall moral decay. What this means for us. Sodom's destruction is a sobering reminder that sin has consequences. God calls all of us to live righteously, whether we struggle with pride, greed, neglect of others, or sexual sin. The focus of this story isn't about singling out one group. It's about holding up a mirror to a society that had abandoned God's design for justice, compassion, and morality. The role of the Messiah. Even in the midst of judgment, we see glimpses of God's mercy. Abraham intercedes for the cities, foreshadowing the role of Christ as our ultimate advocate. Lot and his family are rescued, showing us that salvation is possible for those who listen and obey. This story fits into the Bible's larger narrative of sin, redemption, and hope. It reminds us that while God is just, He is also merciful, always giving us opportunities to turn back to Him. Warnings we still ignore. So what does Sodom and Gomorrah mean for us today? It's a reminder that God takes sin seriously. It's a warning about what happens when societies reject justice, compassion, and righteousness. But it's also a call to repentance. Just as Lot was given a way out, we too are offered salvation through Christ. The question is, will we listen to the warnings, or will we ignore them, like the people of Sodom and Gomorrah? The other nations and their sins. Sodom and Gomorrah weren't the only nations in the Bible to face judgment for their sins. Other powerful civilizations, like Babylon, Nineveh, Egypt, and even God's chosen nations of Israel and Judah, were called out for their wickedness and held accountable. Each of their stories carries profound lessons that remain relevant today. Let's break this down. Babylon, the dangers of pride and self-glorification. Babylon was the epitome of human arrogance and self-glory. From the Tower of Babel to the grand empire described in the book of Daniel, Babylon prioritized power, wealth, and idol worship over humility and righteousness. Today's parallels. Babylon is a symbol of systems and nations obsessed with materialism, status, and dominance. Modern Babylons can be seen in societies that exploit the earth's resources, ignore the vulnerable, and elevate wealth above morality. Lesson. Pride and the pursuit of power without accountability can lead to downfall. No matter how mighty a nation or system appears, without moral foundations, it is destined to crumble. Nineveh, a lesson in repentance and transformation. Nineveh, the capital of Assyria, was infamous for its violence and cruelty. Yet, when Jonah warned them of God's impending judgment, the people repented. They fasted, prayed, and turned from their wicked ways. As a result, God spared them. Today's parallels. Nineveh reminds us that no matter how broken or corrupt a nation, organization, or individual may seem, genuine repentance can lead to renewal. Movements advocating for justice, peace, or environmental protection reflect modern Ninevehs responding to calls for change. Lesson. Transformation is always possible if humility and action replace pride and complacency. Egypt, the price of oppression. Egypt's enslavement of the Israelites and the Pharaoh's stubborn refusal to release them resulted in devastating plagues and the destruction of Egypt's army in the Red Sea. The Pharaoh's pride and disregard for human dignity were Egypt's undoing. Inside Israelis, democracies, and modern Egypts are nations or systems that exploit the weak, deny freedom, or perpetuate inequality. Examples include exploitative labor practices, systemic racism, and authoritarian regimes. Lengthy periods of oppression may seem profitable or powerful in the short term, but it will eventually lead to collapse and judgment. Israel and Judah. Accountability for the blessed. Even God's chosen people were not exempt from judgment. Their idolatry, neglect of the poor, and betrayal of God's covenant led to their exile. Israel and Judah serve as reminders that privilege does not mean immunity from consequences. Today's parallels. Nations or groups that are blessed with resources, power, or influence bear a responsibility to act justly. Modern societies rooted in principles of justice and democracy must continually strive to uphold these values rather than grow complacent. Lesson. Privilege demands responsibility. Ignoring it leads to judgment, even for those who believe they are chosen. The universal takeaway across these examples. Babylon, Nineveh, Egypt, Israel, and Judah. Certain themes are consistent. Pride leads to downfall. Oppression has consequences. Repentance brings restoration. Accountability is universal, even for the powerful or privileged. The question is, what can we, as individuals and nations, learn from these ancient stories? Are we listening to the warnings around us? Are we addressing the pride, greed, or injustice in our own lives or in our societies? This isn't just about the past. It's about the patterns that repeat throughout history and the choices we make to change them. Reflections. As we close this episode, let's think about the lessons from Sodom, Gomorrah, and the other nations we've discussed. The Bible shows us that no nation or person is above judgment. Pride, greed, neglect, and rebellion against God's ways will always lead to destruction. But the good news is that God's mercy is just as powerful as His justice. Take Nineveh, for example. They were on the brink of destruction, but their repentance turned everything around. It's a reminder that it's never too late to change course, whether it's for a person, a community, or even a nation. So here's the question: what sins are we ignoring in our own lives or in the world around us? Are we turning a blind eye to pride, greed, injustice, or neglect of those in need? And if God sent a warning today, would we listen? This year, Let's make it a priority to live intentionally, to embrace humility, and to seek God's guidance in all that we do. Remember, God doesn't just call us to avoid judgment. He calls us to walk in His blessings. Thank you for joining me today on the Legends of Antiquity. As always, stay blessed, stay humble, and let's strive to build a better world together. Until next time, this is Ronil Cole, signing off.